a loving soul. Just a beautiful soul, a beautiful smile.
Her unborn child was also killed as a result of this. She was savagely killed, decapitated by a freaking savage monster.
A mother walks into her daughter's apartment on a quiet Thursday morning in June. What she finds inside will haunt not just her family, but an entire community for years to come. Because on June 9th, 2022, in a small apartment building on Bolivar Street in Alton, Illinois, 22-year-old Liese Dodd, 8 months pregnant and dreaming of her future as a mother, became the victim of one of the most savage murders in Illinois history.
Sounded like the beginning scene of like Criminal Minds or something, you know? Like when somebody's tied up and they're trying to get out, and then all of a sudden the screaming got really, really loud and really intense.
Liese Ann Dodd was 22 years old, vibrant, and on the edge of a new chapter. She was weeks away from holding her baby girl in her arms. Friends described her as kind, loving, someone who lit up every room she entered. She had her whole life mapped out in front of her. A baby shower, a nursery waiting to be filled with laughter. Dreams of motherhood that kept her awake at night with excitement, not fear. Alton, Illinois is a small riverside city just north of St. Louis. The kind of place where neighbors know each other's names and violent crime feels like something that happened somewhere else. On that June morning, when the sun rose over the Mississippi River and cast its golden light across the historic brick buildings downtown, no one could have imagined that a nightmare was unfolding just blocks away on Bolivar Street. But inside apartment number 4, something unspeakable had already happened. And it would be Liese's own mother who would walk through that door first.
That monster, Chief Marcos Polito says, is 22-year-old Deundrea Holloway of Litchfield. Holloway is now charged.
The timeline begins on June 8th. Liese Dodd was in her apartment, 8 months pregnant, preparing for the arrival of her daughter. She was in an on and off relationship with 25-year-old Deundrea Holloway, a relationship that had lasted about 2 years, but was marked by instability. Here's the critical detail that investigators would later uncover. Deundrea Holloway was not the father of Liese's unborn child. That fact, according to prosecutors, may have been simmering beneath the surface of their tumultuous relationship. On June 9th, Liese's mother tried reaching her daughter. No response. She called again. Still nothing.
She had a lot of personal problems with a boyfriend, a lot of calling off. She had a lot of black eyes when she would come in. When she first started, she would make excuses that her dog had jumped up and hit her.
For a mother whose daughter is 8 months pregnant, silence is terrifying. Every unanswered call becomes a racing heartbeat. Every hour without contact feels like an eternity. So she did what any worried mother would do. She drove to her daughter's apartment on Bolivar Street. She knocked. No answer. She tried the door. It was unlocked. And when she stepped inside, her world shattered in ways no human being should ever experience. Liese Dodd's body was inside the apartment, but her head was missing. The scene was beyond comprehension. Blood, violence, the kind of brutality that makes even seasoned investigators pause. Alton Deputy Police Chief Jarrett Ford would later stand outside that apartment building, and when asked about what was discovered inside, he could only say, "What was observed, what was learned, what was found, was absolutely terrible." Liese's mother immediately called the police. Within minutes, Bolivar Street was swarmed with emergency vehicles. Crime scene tape stretched across the entrance, and investigators began piecing together a horror show that would dominate headlines for years. The first piece of evidence was the body itself. Liese Dodd had been decapitated. Her neck had been cut with such force, such intent, that it left no doubt this was an act of rage. But where was her head? That question hung over the investigation, like a dark cloud, until officers made a discovery that sent chills through everyone involved. Just outside the apartment building, in a garbage bin near the entrance, investigators found Liese's severed head. It had been discarded like trash, thrown away as if her life meant nothing. The cruelty of that act, the cold calculation required to do something so depraved, painted a picture of a killer who wasn't just violent, but who wanted to dehumanize his victim even in death. Investigators immediately began searching for Deundrea Holloway. They knew about the relationship, they knew about the tension, and within hours they found him. On that same day, June 9th, 2022, Holloway was arrested in Gillespie, Illinois, a small town about 45 minutes northeast of Alton. He didn't run far, he didn't disappear. He was picked up and taken into custody, and the pieces of this nightmare began falling into place.
Decapitated by a freaking savage monster.
But here's what most people don't realize about this case. This wasn't a crime of passion in the traditional sense. This wasn't a sudden explosion of emotion. The level of violence, the decapitation, the disposal of evidence, it all pointed to something much darker. And as the investigation deepened, prosecutors would discover evidence that suggested this murder was as calculated as it was savage. So what exactly happened inside that apartment? What led a 25-year-old man to commit an act so horrifying that it would traumatize an entire community? The answer lies in the evidence that prosecutors would present over the next 2.5 years. Madison County State's Attorney Tom Hain announced the charges against Deundrea Holloway shortly after his arrest. He was charged with first-degree murder, intentional homicide of an unborn child, and concealment of a homicidal death. 3 charges, each one carrying the weight of a life destroyed, a future stolen, and a family shattered. The case seemed straightforward on the surface. A violent relationship, a pregnant woman, a brutal murder. But then came the delays. Holloway's defense team raised questions about his fitness to stand trial. In May 2024, nearly 2 years after the murder, Associate Judge Neil Schroeder ordered a court-appointed psychologist to evaluate whether Holloway was mentally competent to face trial. This wasn't unusual in a case this severe, but it meant that Liese's family would have to wait even longer for justice.
And you didn't have to sit, thank goodness, through a trial, which can just be so excruciating.
Correct. Yeah. Early on, I had wanted to go to trial. For him to have to sit in front of a jury and confess and acknowledge what he did. But as the time wore on...
For Liese's mother, the delays were torture. She had found her daughter's decapitated body. She had lived with that image every single day since June 9th, 2022. And now she had to wait while the legal system worked through its processes, while the man accused of killing her daughter and unborn granddaughter sat in a jail cell, undergoing evaluations. But eventually the system moved forward. On Friday, January 17th, 2025, nearly 3 years after Liese's murder, Deundrea Holloway stood in Madison County Circuit Court and entered a guilty plea. He admitted to first-degree murder. He admitted to the intentional homicide of an unborn child. He admitted to concealing a homicidal death. There would be no trial, no jury, no dramatic courtroom battle, just a guilty plea and a sentencing hearing that would finally bring some measure of closure to a family that had been living in agony.
New at 4, and just in the last few hours, Deundrea Holloway got 30 years in prison for killing a Metro East woman and another 30 years for the death of her unborn child. The victim was Liese Dodd.
Judge Neil Schroeder handed down the sentence. 60 years in prison, 30 years for the murder of Liese Dodd, 20 years for the intentional homicide of her unborn child, 10 years for concealment of a homicidal death. The sentences would run consecutively, meaning Holloway would serve every single year before he could even think about freedom. Let's take a moment to really understand what was lost here. Liese Dodd was 22 years old. Think about that, 22. Most people at that age are just starting to figure out who they are, what they want from life. Liese had figured it out. She wanted to be a mother. She had picked out baby names. She had imagined the first time she would hold her daughter. She had planned a future filled with love and laughter and all the messy, beautiful chaos that comes with raising a child. That future was stolen from her, but it wasn't just her future. It was her daughter's future too. That unborn baby girl would never take her first breath, would never feel her mother's arms around her, would never celebrate a birthday or graduate from school or fall in love or experience any of the infinite possibilities that life offers. During the sentencing hearing, Liese's mother spoke about the unbearable loss. She talked about a life without ever knowing the joy of watching Liese raise her granddaughter. She talked about the nightmares that still wake her up in the middle of the night. She talked about the hole in their family that can never be filled. The Alton community rallied around Liese's family in the aftermath of the murder. Vigils were held. Flowers were left outside the Bolivar Street apartment building. People who had never met Liese felt compelled to honor her memory because the brutality of what happened to her struck a nerve that went beyond typical crime stories. This felt personal. This felt like it could happen to anyone. But here's a question that haunts this case. Could this have been prevented? Were there warning signs in Holloway and Dodd's relationship that went unnoticed or unreported? The on and off nature of their relationship suggests instability, possibly even prior incidents of conflict or violence. But without concrete evidence of previous abuse or intervention by authorities, we're left wondering if Liese Dodd's murder was an explosion that could have been predicted or a horrifying anomaly that no one saw coming. What we do know is that domestic violence against pregnant women is tragically common. Studies show that pregnancy can escalate existing abuse or trigger violence in unstable relationships. Homicide is one of the leading causes of death among pregnant women in the United States. That's not a statistic people talk about at baby showers or prenatal appointments, but it's a reality that needs to be discussed. This case forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about violence, about relationships, and about the systems we rely on to protect vulnerable people. Liese Dodd was 8 months pregnant. She was vulnerable in the most literal sense. She was preparing to bring new life into the world, and instead, her life was taken in one of the most brutal ways imaginable. The criminal justice system did eventually work in this case. Deundrea Holloway was arrested the same day Liese's body was discovered. He was charged appropriately. He was held accountable with a 60-year sentence. But does that feel like justice? Can 60 years in prison ever balance the scales when 2 lives were stolen, when a family was destroyed, when a mother found her daughter's decapitated body? These are questions without easy answers. Justice in cases like this is a concept that feels inadequate. No sentence can bring Liese back. No amount of prison time can undo the trauma inflicted on her mother and her family. But what it can do is send a message that violence like this will not be tolerated, that taking a life, especially in such a savage manner, comes with consequences that last a lifetime. If there's a lesson to be taken from Liese Dodd's story, it's this. We need to do better at recognizing the warning signs of violence in relationships. We need to create environments where people feel safe reporting abuse. We need to support pregnant women, especially those in unstable or dangerous situations. And we need to remember that behind every true crime story is a real person with real dreams and real loved ones who are left to pick up the pieces. Liese Dodd wasn't a statistic. She wasn't just another headline. She was a daughter, a friend, a soon-to-be mother. She had favorite songs and inside jokes with her friends and plans for her daughter's first Christmas. All of that matters. All of that deserves to be remembered.
Alton police describe a horrific murder scene that involved the decapitation of a pregnant woman due to give birth next month.
It is a savage killing that ended with charges today against the man police call a monster.
When Judge Neil Schroeder handed down the 60-year sentence on January 17, 2025, it marked the official end of a legal process that had dragged on for nearly 3 years. But for Liese's family, there is no end. The grief doesn't stop when the gavel comes down. The nightmares don't disappear when the defendant is led away in handcuffs.
She was savagely killed.
The Alton police chief was visibly angry as he described what happened to 22-year-old Liese Dodd.
The Alton community has tried to move forward, but the Bolivar Street apartment building stands as a reminder of what happened there. People walk past it every day. Some look away. Some pause and remember. Some say a quiet prayer for a young woman they never knew, but whose story touched them deeply. Deundrea Holloway will spend the next 60 years behind bars. He'll be in his 80s before he's eligible for release. He'll spend decades reflecting on the choices he made on June 9, 2022. Whether he feels remorse, whether he understands the magnitude of what he destroyed, we may never truly know. What we do know is that 2 lives ended that day, and countless others were forever changed. In the weeks and months after the murder, crime scene tape came down. Blood was cleaned. The apartment building returned to some semblance of normalcy. But you can't erase trauma. You can't scrub away the memory of what happened in apartment number 4. The murder of Liese Dodd raises questions that extend far beyond one apartment in Alton, Illinois. It forces us to examine how society handles domestic violence, how we protect pregnant women, and how we intervene before relationships turn deadly. According to research, nearly half of all female homicide victims are killed by current or former intimate partners. Pregnancy doesn't protect women from violence. In many cases, it escalates it. If you or someone you know is in a dangerous relationship, there are resources available. The National Domestic Violence Hotline operates 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Local shelters provide safe housing. Law enforcement can issue protective orders. These systems aren't perfect, but they exist because too many lives have been lost to intimate partner violence. Liese Ann Dodd, 2000 to 2022, 22 years on this earth, a lifetime of potential cut short. When we talk about her case, when we examine the evidence and the timeline and the legal proceedings, we can't lose sight of the human being at the center of it all. She loved, she dreamed, she mattered. And her daughter, who never got to draw her first breath, mattered too. Her family will carry this loss for the rest of their lives. They'll celebrate holidays with an empty chair at the table. They'll have moments of joy that are immediately followed by pangs of grief. They'll think about what Liese's daughter would look like, what she would sound like, what kind of person she would have become. These are the ripples of violence. These are the consequences that don't make it into court documents or sentencing hearings. Here's something most people don't consider. Every single day in America, multiple women are killed by intimate partners. Every single day, children lose their mothers to domestic violence. Liese Dodd's story is horrifying in its brutality, but it's not unique in its basic framework. A woman in a troubled relationship killed by someone she knew, someone she had trusted at some point. The question we have to ask ourselves is, what are we going to do about it? Are we going to continue scrolling past these stories, shaking our heads and moving on? Or are we going to demand better systems, better protections, better interventions? Because the next Liese Dodd might be your neighbor, your co-worker, your friend. And wouldn't you want someone to step in before it's too late? On a quiet evening in Alton, Illinois, the sun sets over the Mississippi River, casting the same golden light that Liese Dodd must have seen from her apartment window. The river keeps flowing. Life goes on in small-town America. But on Bolivar Street, there's a memory that refuses to fade. 60 years in prison. That's what Deundrea Holloway received for taking 2 lives. 60 years to think about what he did. 60 years that Liese Dodd and her daughter will never have. You can debate whether that's enough. You can argue about justice and punishment and rehabilitation. But what you can't debate is this. On June 9th, 2022, something evil walked into an apartment on Bolivar Street. And when it left, 2 innocent lives were gone forever. Remember her name, Liese Ann Dodd. She deserves to be more than a true crime story. She deserves to be remembered as a young woman who loved life, who was excited to become a mother, who had dreams that stretched far into the future. And in remembering her, maybe, just maybe, we can prevent the next tragedy. Maybe we can save the next life. Maybe we can build a world where women don't have to fear the people they love. Because that's what Liese would have wanted. Not just justice for herself, but safety for everyone who comes after her.